Rain fell in steady sheets over the streets of Seattle. It wasn't the kind of rain that drove people away, it was soft, almost polite, tapping on windows like it had something to say. Ethan noticed it as he pushed open the door to the little cafe where he spent most evenings. The warm smell of coffee hit him first, rich and comforting. He liked that smell. It reminded him that some things in the world stayed steady, even when everything else felt messy. Ethan was used to being alone. He'd been divorced for 3 years now, and the memories of his marriage were a quiet ache in the back of his mind, not sharp enough to sting, but enough to make him cautious. He came here most nights, not for the coffee or the pastries, but for the chessboard that sat at a corner table, worn from years of use. He liked the simplicity of it. Every piece had its place, every rule was clear. Life outside the board was messy and unpredictable, but on the board, he could control everything, or at least try to. Tonight, he arrived early, as usual. The cafe wasn't crowded. A few people sipped lattes, some tapped away on laptops, and the rain made soft music against the windows. Ethan sat down at his usual corner, set up the chessboard, and waited. He didn't mind waiting. There was something meditative about it, the quiet, the anticipation, the possibility that someone might walk in and play. He was so absorbed in arranging the pieces that he almost didn't notice her. Claire walked in like a gust of fresh air, her coat damp from the rain, hair sticking slightly to her cheeks. She looked around, scanning the cafe as if deciding whether to stay or leave. She was average height, with bright eyes that seemed to notice more than most people saw. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to handle disappointment but refused to let it define her. Ethan noticed her immediately. Something about her presence made the air shift in the room, though he didn't know why. She approached the chessboard slowly, hesitating as if she wasn't sure it was okay to sit there. Most people didn't. Most people just grabbed a coffee and left. "Do you mind if I play?" she asked, voice soft but confident. Ethan blinked, surprised. No. "Please, sit," he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. She sat down carefully, placing her wet bag on the floor. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the rain and the occasional clink of cups from the counter. She studied the board for a moment, as if reading not just the pieces but the man across from her. Ethan felt it, the quiet scrutiny, the attention, and somehow, it felt like a challenge. "First game?" he asked, trying to break the silence. "Yeah," she said. "I'm a little rusty." He smiled faintly, moving a pawn forward. "Don't worry. It's just a game." She mirrored his move, her hand steady. That first move was simple, but the air between them suddenly felt different. There was no small talk, no awkward icebreaker chatter, just two people silently measuring each other through the game. Ethan felt it immediately. Something about her presence made the room smaller, closer, warmer. He wasn't sure if it was the way she concentrated or the way her eyes occasionally flicked up at him, but he felt it, the pull. The game continued. Pawns, knights, bishops, simple moves at first. Ethan realized he didn't just want to win. He wanted to understand her, to see what made her tick. Every time she paused, he noticed. Every time she made a choice that surprised him, he felt it, a thrill he hadn't expected. He hadn't felt this kind of connection in years. "Interesting move," he said finally, when she made a risky play with her knight. She shrugged lightly, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Sometimes it's worth the risk." Ethan nodded, moving his queen in response. "Sometimes it's not." Neither of them laughed, but the tension between them was electric. Something had shifted. They were no longer just playing a game. They were talking without words, testing each other's boundaries, seeing how far they could go without saying too much. Time passed without notice. The rain outside softened to a drizzle. The cafe filled slowly with other customers, but they barely noticed. Each move they made was deliberate, thoughtful, a reflection of their personalities. Ethan realized something strange. He was enjoying himself, but he was also nervous. Nervous because he wasn't supposed to feel this way. Not over a game. Not after all he'd been through. The game ended in a draw. Neither had won, neither had lost, and yet both had felt something profound. It was in the way she looked at him after he made his final move, a look that said more than words could express. It was in the brief pause before she got up, as if neither of them wanted to leave. "I had fun," she said finally, gathering her things. Ethan nodded, unable to find words that felt adequate. "Yeah. Me too." She smiled at him, small but genuine, and walked toward the door. He watched her go, feeling a strange mix of disappointment and anticipation. Something had started tonight, something quiet and unexpected, and he knew that neither of them would be able to ignore it. As the door closed behind her, he realized the truth: the game wasn't over. Not really. Something had shifted, something delicate and fragile, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like maybe, just maybe, the next move could change everything. He stayed at the table for a while longer, staring at the chessboard. Every piece felt different now, every square a symbol of possibility. The rain outside had stopped, but inside, everything had changed. Ethan didn't know it yet, but Claire's arrival had set in motion a game neither of them could have predicted, a game that had nothing to do with pawns or knights and everything to do with the heart. And in that moment, as he packed up the board, he realized he was waiting. Waiting for the next move, for the next encounter, for whatever would happen between them. Sometimes, a simple game is never simple at all. The next week, Ethan returned to the cafe with a quiet hope he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't sure why he felt it. He had told himself this was just a game, but the memory of Claire's smile lingered like sunlight after a storm. The corner table waited, worn wood and chessboard ready, but it wasn't the same without her. And then she appeared. Claire came in with that same careful step, her coat damp again from the drizzle outside. She spotted him immediately, and for a second, their eyes locked. It wasn't just recognition. It was a spark of curiosity, something unspoken that made Ethan's chest tighten. "Mind if I join again?" she asked. Her voice carried the same mix of politeness and confidence, but now there was a warmth to it. "Of course," he said, trying to hide the excitement in his voice. They sat, and the chessboard became more than a game. It became their quiet ritual. Week after week, moves became conversations, gestures became signals. A pawn pushed forward wasn't just strategy, it was a question. A captured piece wasn't just a win, it was a challenge. Outside the cafe, life continued to demand their attention. Ethan's job at the small marketing firm kept him busy, but lately he found himself glancing at his phone, wondering if Claire would text him. Claire, meanwhile, had her own life. She worked at a bookstore nearby and carried herself with independence, a kind of strength that came from learning to rely on herself. She laughed easily, but those who looked closely could see the quiet hesitation in her eyes, the way she sometimes stared off as if replaying old disappointments. But the cafe was different. In the cafe, they were equals, players in a game where rules didn't matter as much as understanding each other. They talked more than before, at first cautiously, small questions about favorite books, movies, the weather, but soon, the conversations deepened. Ethan found himself telling her things he hadn't told anyone, stories about his childhood, the quiet regrets he carried from his marriage, the little victories that reminded him life was still worth living. Claire listened. She didn't judge. She asked questions that made him think, made him reflect. And slowly, she shared pieces of herself too. She talked about her dream of traveling, the heartbreaks she had survived, the moments of quiet joy she found in her bookstore and in small acts of kindness. One night, after a particularly long game that stretched past closing time, they walked together down the wet streets. Streetlights reflected on puddles, and the air smelled of rain and spring. Neither of them spoke for several blocks, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Silence had become a language between them. "I didn't expect to like this," Claire said finally, breaking the quiet. "Like what?" Ethan asked, turning to her, curious. "This, all of this. Playing. Talking. It feels easy." natural. Ethan smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. Yeah. I didn't either. I thought I was just killing time. But it's more than that, she said, her voice softer. It feels like, maybe we're playing for something else, without even knowing it. He nodded, understanding more than he wanted to admit. He felt it too, the shift from simple games to something deeper, something fragile and electric. And still, neither of them spoke the words that lingered in the air. The words that would change everything. Days turned into weeks. The chessboard became their anchor, the cafe their safe place. They laughed more now, teasing each other about careless moves or clever strategies. They shared coffee, sometimes meals, sometimes just the quiet moments between games. Ethan noticed how her hair fell across her face when she concentrated, how her fingers lingered on the board before moving a piece, how her smile reached her eyes. Claire noticed how Ethan's brow furrowed when he focused, how he hesitated before saying something personal, how he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. And slowly, something began to blur, the rules they had set. They had promised themselves it was just a game. No expectations. No promises. But the line between game and reality became thinner each time they met. One evening, Claire lingered after the cafe had emptied. She rested her chin on her hands and looked at Ethan. Do you ever think about what this could be? Beyond the game? Ethan froze. The question was simple, but it carried weight. He had spent weeks pretending it didn't matter, that he could keep his heart safe. But now, hearing it aloud, he couldn't pretend anymore. Yeah, he admitted quietly. I think about it more than I should. She smiled, a little sadly. Me too. I wasn't supposed to. That night, they walked together longer than usual, through empty streets and past the river that reflected the city lights. It was quiet, intimate, a world apart from everything else. They didn't hold hands, didn't touch, but the closeness was enough. They understood each other in ways that words couldn't capture. Ethan realized something dangerous, he was waiting for her. Waiting for her messages, waiting for her visits, waiting for the moments they weren't supposed to feel, moments that made him hope for more. Claire realized the same. She caught herself daydreaming about him during work, wondering if he thought of her the same way, wondering what it would be like if the rules didn't exist. And yet, neither spoke of it. Neither crossed the line. They kept the game alive because it was safer. Safer than risking everything by admitting feelings. Safer than hoping and failing. Then, one evening, Claire made a move that wasn't on the board. She leaned closer, just slightly, and whispered, I feel like I've been waiting for this, someone like you. Ethan's heart skipped. That single sentence carried the weight of months. It was admission, longing, and invitation all at once. He wanted to reach out, to tell her he felt the same, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he nodded, and the game continued. It was terrifying and thrilling all at once. They had started with pawns and knights, with strategy and patience, but now, the stakes had changed. The game was no longer about winning, it was about not losing each other before they even tried to claim what was slowly becoming theirs. By the time the cafe closed that night, neither wanted to leave. They lingered in the doorway, unsure if they should say goodbye, unsure if they should risk everything with a single word. Finally, Claire smiled, a soft, hopeful smile. See you next week? Ethan nodded, trying to look casual, but his chest felt tight. Yeah. Next week. As she walked away, he realized that the rules had already blurred. The game had moved off the board and into their hearts, and neither of them knew how to play it yet. Every move now mattered, not just on the chessboard, but in every look, every word, every pause between them. And somewhere deep inside, Ethan knew that this game would end differently than either of them expected. But for now, they kept playing. Spring had arrived in Seattle, but the evening still carried a chill. The kind that makes people pull their coats tighter and walk a little faster. Ethan sat at the cafe corner table, his fingers drumming on the worn wood. The chessboard in front of him looked ordinary, but tonight it felt different. He couldn't explain why, but the air seemed heavier, charged with something he hadn't felt before. Claire arrived late, as if the city itself had delayed her. She shook off her coat, smiling softly, and Ethan noticed a kind of sadness in her eyes he hadn't seen before. He tried not to read too much into it, but there was something about the way she moved that suggested this game wasn't just about chess anymore. "Sorry I'm late," she said quietly, sliding into the chair across from him. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of the table, fingertips brushing the worn board. "It's been a long day." Ethan nodded, unsure what to say. "It's fine. Are you ready?" She gave a small, tight smile. "Always." The first moves were deliberate, slower than usual. Ethan noticed her pausing longer, thinking deeper, almost as if she were measuring more than just the board, measuring him. He did the same, suddenly aware that each pawn, each knight, carried more weight than before. Every move was personal. "This game feels different," Claire said, almost to herself. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "It does." Neither said why. They didn't need to. It hung between them like the soft hum of the rain outside, or the faint light from the street lamps filtering through the cafe windows. Halfway through the match, Ethan realized he was playing not to win, but to stay close to her a little longer. His hands trembled slightly as he moved a bishop. He hated that he cared so much. Chess had always been about strategy, about control, about thinking 2 steps ahead. But tonight, he didn't want control. He didn't want strategy. He just wanted her to stay. Claire noticed his hesitation. Her eyes softened for a brief moment, and she moved her knight with precision, capturing one of his pawns. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just looked at him, steady and calm, as if daring him to say something he wasn't ready to say. Then she spoke, softly. "Ethan. I need to tell you something." He froze, heart thudding in his chest. The cafe felt suddenly smaller, warmer, like it was holding its breath with them. "What is it?" he asked carefully, trying to mask the sudden fear in his voice. Claire took a deep breath. "I'm leaving." The words hit him harder than any checkmate ever could. His mind raced. Leaving? What did that mean? She had been offered a job in Vancouver, a fresh start, a new life. She had kept it to herself until now, and now she was telling him, and the truth was undeniable. The game they had been playing wasn't safe anymore. Ethan tried to process it. He had imagined many endings to this story, quiet goodbyes, lingering smiles, maybe even a confession, but this wasn't one of them. Leaving? His voice was quieter than he intended. When? Soon, she said, looking down at her hands. Next month. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to ruin this, whatever this is. He swallowed hard, trying to hold on to calm. He wanted to argue, to beg her to stay, to tell her everything he felt. But words failed him. Instead, he nodded. He moved his rook, not caring about the strategy, not caring about the game. They continued playing, but the pace changed. The moves were slower, heavier. Every piece taken, every strategy attempted felt symbolic of something more. Ethan captured her bishop, hesitated, and then said nothing. Claire captured his pawn, her fingers lingering a moment too long on the piece before she placed it back on the board. Time passed in silence. Outside, the city lights reflected on puddles from earlier rain, but inside, it was as if the world had disappeared. Just them, just the board, just the truth neither of them had dared to fully voice. Finally, it ended. One last move. Checkmate. Ethan stared at the board, breathing shallow, heart pounding. The game was over, but it didn't feel like a victory. He hadn't won her, hadn't changed her mind, hadn't done anything but play a match that now felt meaningless. He looked at her. She looked back, eyes wide, holding back something he couldn't name. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The cafe's lights dimmed as the evening wound down. The barista had cleaned the tables, but they remained at their corner, unable to move, unable to leave. I guess, we both lost, Claire said finally, voice breaking slightly. Ethan shook his head, bitter smile forming. No, maybe we were playing the wrong kind of game all along. She didn't argue. She just looked at him, her expression soft and sad, and for a moment, he thought she might reach for his hand, but she didn't. She simply stood, gathering her coat, her bag, her resolve. Ethan wanted to stop her. Wanted to tell her that he couldn't let her go, that he didn't want her to leave, that he had been waiting for months to tell her how much she meant. But the words stuck. They always did at the wrong moments. I should go, she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. Yeah, he said, voice low. Yeah, you should. They walked to the door together, the world outside suddenly louder, brighter, colder. Ethan wanted to remember this moment, every detail, the rain, the smell of coffee, the sound of her voice, the way her hair fell across her face, but he also knew he'd remember it differently in the coming days, colored by longing and what-ifs. They stopped outside. She turned to him, hesitant, her eyes shining. Maybe, someday, we'll play again, she said. Maybe, he whispered, though his heart wanted to say more. He wanted to tell her he couldn't wait, that he couldn't imagine another day without seeing her. But the words remained inside, trapped like the last pawn on the board. And then she walked away. Ethan stayed there, watching her disappear into the night, feeling the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on him. He realized something painful but undeniable: the game was over, but the emotions, the connection, the longing, they weren't. They were just beginning. The chessboard sat in front of him, empty now, pieces scattered, symbols of a match that didn't matter anymore. He traced the squares with his finger, imagining where she had moved, imagining what might have been. For the first time, he understood that some games couldn't be won, some feelings couldn't be controlled, and some endings were unexpected. As he walked home that night, the city lights reflecting in puddles, he couldn't stop thinking about her. He didn't know if she would come back, didn't know if he would see her again, but he knew one thing: the final match had changed everything. It had shifted something fragile, something real, and neither of them would ever forget it. Sometimes, the end isn't about victory. Sometimes, it's about learning what really matters, before it slips away. Ethan reached his apartment, tired, heart aching, but alive in a way he hadn't been in years. And somewhere, across the city, Claire felt the same ache, the same longing, and the same hope that maybe, just maybe, the game wasn't over for good. Days turned into weeks. The cafe corner table remained empty, the chessboard untouched, but the memory of that final match lingered in Ethan's mind like a shadow he couldn't shake. Every time he walked past the cafe, he glanced through the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of Claire. She wasn't there. Not yet. Not anymore. Ethan tried to go about his life, focusing on work, errands, and the routines that once felt safe. But everything felt quieter, slower. The city streets seemed duller without her laughter echoing beside him, the cafe smelled less inviting without her presence. He caught himself replaying their final game in his head, every move, every pause, every look. It wasn't just a game anymore, it had been the start of something he didn't want to let go of. Claire was doing the same. Vancouver was bright and full of new opportunities, but she found herself thinking of Seattle, of the rain, of the corner table, of Ethan's quiet strength. She told herself it was just nostalgia, but she knew better. Every time she closed her eyes at night, she saw him, saw the unspoken words, the things left undone. One rainy afternoon, 3 weeks after she had left, Ethan returned to the cafe. The owner greeted him with a smile. "Still coming back for chess, huh?" Ethan smiled weakly. Old habits die hard. He sat at the corner table, staring at the empty board. The pieces were still there, neatly arranged, but they felt lifeless. He traced the squares with his fingers, remembering the last night, the final checkmate, the words that hadn't been said. And then, unexpectedly, a familiar voice broke the quiet. "Mind if I join you?" Ethan's heart stopped. He looked up, and there she was. Claire. Standing in the doorway, rain dripping from her coat, eyes soft but determined. She had returned. "Claire," he said, barely above a whisper, as if speaking louder might shatter the moment. "I couldn't stay away," she admitted, sliding into the chair across from him. "Seattle, this place, it's too much a part of me now. And I realized, maybe I shouldn't have left so soon." Ethan didn't speak. Words failed him again, but his heart was pounding with relief and hope. They started playing again, slowly at first. The chessboard between them now felt alive, vibrant, carrying the weight of what had been unsaid. But this time, the moves weren't just strategy, they were conversations, confessions, laughter, and longing all in one. Claire moved a knight, and Ethan smiled. "You're aggressive today," he teased. "You always say that," she replied, eyes twinkling. "Maybe I just want to win this time." The banter was light, but underneath, both of them felt the tension of months without each other. Every glance, every pause, every subtle gesture carried meaning. Ethan noticed the way her fingers brushed the board as she moved, the way she leaned slightly toward him when she concentrated. Claire noticed how he watched her, the way his eyes softened, the little hesitations that spoke louder than any words. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. The cafe emptied again, lights dimming, rain pattering softly outside. They played, talked, and laughed, and for the first time, there were no walls between them. They shared stories of the weeks apart, the little victories, the loneliness, the realizations that life felt incomplete without the other. Ethan realized he didn't want to pretend anymore. The game had taught him patience, caution, and the beauty of small gestures, but it had also shown him that some risks were worth taking. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Claire, I don't want to play it safe anymore. Not with you." She looked at him, heart racing. "Ethan. I mean it," he said, taking a deep breath. "All this time, I've been waiting, holding back, pretending. I can't do that anymore. I care about you, more than I can say. And I don't want another month, another week, or another day without telling you that." Claire's eyes glistened. She reached across the board, placing her hand over his. "I've been waiting for you to say that," she whispered. "All those weeks. I thought you might never tell me. I thought it was too late." Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "It's never too late. Not for this. Not for us." For the first time, the board between them didn't matter. The chess game that had begun as a quiet ritual had transformed into something real, something tangible, something neither of them wanted to end. They didn't need to rush. They didn't need grand gestures or dramatic confessions. The simple touch, the quiet presence, the shared laughter, it was enough. They had learned to play slowly, carefully, but now they could move freely, guided not by strategy but by the heart. Outside, the rain stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering across the streets, turning puddles into mirrors. It felt symbolic, though neither of them needed symbolism. The world outside matched what was happening inside, a shift, a beginning, a chance to step forward together. Ethan and Claire walked out of the cafe together that evening, leaving the chessboard behind. They didn't need it anymore. Their connection wasn't confined to a table or a game. They talked, laughed, and even walked in silence, comfortable with each other's presence. Every step felt natural, easy, like they had always belonged together. Days passed, and the pattern continued. They didn't have to plan it, coffee dates, walks, quiet evenings, they simply moved together through life, rediscovering each other, discovering what it meant to trust and hope again. Their love didn't explode all at once, it grew steadily, tenderly, like a game that finally had no end. Ethan realized that some games aren't meant to be won in the traditional sense. Some games exist to teach patience, to reveal truth, to show you what you truly care about. And Claire realized that leaving had been necessary, not to escape, but to understand that coming back was where she belonged. Months later, the cafe corner table remained, the chessboard still in place, but it felt different. Now, it was a symbol not of what had been lost, but of what had begun. A reminder that sometimes the end of a game is just the start of something far more meaningful. Ethan and Claire didn't need dramatic gestures or grand declarations. They had learned that love could exist in small moments, a touch of hands, a shared smile, a quiet conversation over coffee. They had found each other not in rush, not in force, but in patient understanding and shared hearts. And though life would continue to bring challenges, uncertainties, and decisions, they knew one thing for certain: the end of the game had been unexpected for both of them, but it had brought them exactly where they needed to be. Sometimes, endings are beginnings. Sometimes, loss is the path to finding what really matters. And sometimes, love is the quiet victory that no checkmate can ever capture. Ethan and Claire walked down the rainy Seattle streets together that evening, hands brushing, hearts light, knowing that the game was over, but the story was just beginning.